We now turn to the second type of price control, which is called a price floor. Okay. So instead of setting a maximum price, a price floor sets a minimum price. Right? So this is where a government law basically says, look, sellers can't sell a good for lower than a particular amount. Okay. So a price floor is a government mandated minimum price in a market. Okay. Now, the idea is that you're trying to mandate a price that's above the equilibrium. Okay. So for example, in a particular market, if the government thinks that price is too low, then they might want to implement a price floor to try to bring that price up above. So we typically see this in agricultural markets where the government might say that the price that's being paid to farmers is too low for corn or something like that. Okay. Now again, economists aren't big fans of price controls because it's not like in a market you can just say, let's make the price higher or lower, right? The equilibrium price is kind of telling you something, right? All right, but let's go through the analysis and we can kind of see some of the consequences of trying to implement a price floor. All right, so let's kind of use my made-up market here, market for ice cream. There's not a price floor in the market for ice cream, but let's go ahead and label this. Let's put price in here, quantity in here. Okay, let's label our equilibrium price. Okay, P star. And let's label our equilibrium quantity. There we go. Q star. Okay. And let's label our demand curve. And let's label our supply curve. Okay, so we have supply and demand for ice cream. We've got our diagram here. And now suppose the government thinks that this price, the equilibrium price of ice cream, is too low. So for a price floor to have any impact on the market, it has to be above equilibrium. The idea is you're trying to bring that price up, right? The price is too low, so you're trying to bring it up. So to impact a market, a price floor must be above the equilibrium price. So it must be above P star. Okay. So, and I know it seems weird. Ceilings are down below and floors are up above, but that's the way it works. So let's go back to our dark purple and go ahead and put in a nice line here. Suppose this price floor is enacted by the government and sets a minimum price of $5. So we're going to put PF for price floor. Okay. Okay. So, all right, so we've got a price floor. And what are some of the issues with a price floor? Well, the sellers now are going to be pretty excited, right? They're going to say, hey, this is great. We've got this, oh man, I hit the wrong, there we go. Let's go back to this one. The sellers would say, yeah, this is great. We've got this nice high price, okay? And so quantity supplied is out here. However, with that high price, we know that the buyers are not terribly thrilled, right? So at this high price, we can find the quantity that buyers will buy by going to the demand curve. This is going to be quantity demanded, okay? And here again, we see the market is not in equilibrium. Buyers and sellers do not agree on both price and quantity, right? So we've got some problems, okay? All right. Now, with a price floor, we end up with the opposite problem, okay? So the consequence of a price floor is not going to be a shortage, it will be a surplus. Okay. And what's a surplus? It is when quantity supplied is much larger than quantity demanded. Okay. Now, normally, if there wasn't a price floor in a market, if there was a surplus of goods, what would happen, right? Well, the store would have a sale, right? It would lower the price, right? These are clearance racks at department stores, right? So that is, the market would respond by lowering the price and getting rid of the surplus. But with a price floor, you can't. It's illegal. You can't bring the price down low. So you have a surplus that doesn't go away, okay? And so let's go ahead and label this surplus in here. Right, so this consequence, this surplus, that is the result of a price floor, is something the market can't get rid of. Okay. Now, this is also one of the issues of a price floor, right? So put yourself in your shoes, put yourself in the shoes of these sellers of ice cream, okay? So you might initially be excited. You're thinking, wow, this is going to be a nice high price. I can sell my ice cream. But you're quickly going to realize that not that many people want to buy your ice cream at that higher price, right? So you're probably not going to be inclined to make and bring a bunch more ice cream to market because you're just going to have a surplus. You're going to have a bunch of ice cream that's going to melt and it's going to be a mess and a disaster, right? So sellers will only go along with a price floor if somebody agrees to buy the surplus, and that someone is always the government, right? So that is, to maintain a price floor, government must buy the surplus. And this is what happens in some agricultural markets. Now, they call them price supports or agricultural price supports, but they're basically price floors, right? And so in a lot of agricultural markets today, there are price floors for things like corn and soybeans, wheat, different grains, and a lot of these price controls go all the way back to the Great Depression, right? When farmers were kind of losing their farms, going bankrupt, and a lot of these price controls were put in to try to keep prices for agricultural products high so they could make some money. Never really worked out so well, but they've stayed since then, right? And so what the government has to do is the government promises to buy this surplus. Otherwise, if you're a farmer and there's a price floor, you're not going to grow extra stuff, right? So in order to maintain the price floor, the government has to buy the surplus, okay? Okay, so consequence of a price floor is a surplus. That is when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, okay? All right. So that's price floor, that's the graph of it. Now let's talk about another example of a price floor, which is one you're probably more familiar with, which is a minimum wage law, right? So minimum wage laws are an example of a price floor. So it is a price floor in the market for labor, right? It basically says, look, workers can't be paid below a particular amount, okay? So the way it works here in the United States is that we have a federal minimum wage. At the moment, this is $7.25. States and counties and even cities can actually increase the minimum wage above that amount, but they can't go below, okay? There's a couple states in the Midwest that are agricultural states that have exemptions from minimum wage laws, so we won't really get into that. But that's the basic idea. The federal minimum wage is $7.25, but states and counties and cities can actually go above it, but they can't go below, okay? All right, so let's think about this. So what is the intent, right? Well, the intent is to increase the wages or money made by workers that have low skills, okay? Now, you and I, right, we're we have a college degree or you're working on a college degree. So we're considered high-skilled workers, right? So a lot of times minimum wage laws don't really apply to us, okay? But for workers that don't have a lot of skills, a lot of times the jobs they fill maybe don't pay quite that much, okay? So the idea is to kind of increase the wages for these jobs that don't require a lot of skills, okay? Well, with any type of price control, there's always going to be some consequences, right? And so, people can debate and discuss minimum wage laws today. But a lot of times economists kind of remind people that a minimum wage law is a price floor, right? And so if we think about this, our diagram says there should be a surplus of workers, right? Because if we're looking at a market for labor, the supply is the supply of workers. That is the people who want to work, okay? So a minimum wage law should lead to a surplus of workers. And this is why you get the standard textbook argument that minimum wage laws will lead to an increase in unemployment. That space, that's unemployment, okay? Now, it's interesting because if you actually look at unemployment rates today, they are actually quite low. So many people who support minimum wage laws would say, well, if unemployment is so low, how can this be a result of minimum wage laws? So it is true that labor markets these days are pretty tight. Unemployment rates are pretty low, right? And again, proponents of minimum wage laws would argue, especially in these low-skilled labor markets, employers have more bargaining power than employees, right? And so the idea of a minimum wage is to kind of set some minimum level where employers can't pay below that amount, right? Now, to fully kind of go through this debate on minimum wage, we also have to talk about productivity. Right? And this is what we'll get to in chapters 25 and 26. Okay, so we can't quite finish this discussion now, but just know that our graph kind of shows us there should be a surplus of workers, and that's why you get that standard textbook explanation that minimum wage laws will lead to increase in unemployment. But really, there's a little bit more to it, and that is minimum wage laws tend to affect workers who have the lowest productivity, right? So it turns out we're paid generally according to our productivity level. That is, if we make a company more money, we tend to be paid more money, right? And so lower productivity workers are the ones who are generally affected by minimum wage laws. So if someone's productivity is below what the minimum wage is, they might not be hired, right? So those are the people who tend to be affected by minimum wage laws, right? So we'll come back to this and talk about productivity in chapters 25 and 26, okay?